there's a new VP of sales that came on board. This person quickly established a target-based compensation plan that lowered the base salary but raised the commissions dramatically, and the commissions were paid upon revenue shipped. So the result of this change was that they lost most of their sales team. The company ended up 2 years later reverting back to the original comp plan. And the reason it didn't work is simple. Commissions based upon revenue shipped take the responsibility out of the hands of the salesperson.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Sales compensation is a multi-edged sword. There are many variables, and each variable could significantly impact your top line and bottom line if the consequences are not thought through. If the base salary is too low, and if it doesn't meet the basic needs of salespeople, they might be looking for additional sources of revenue for themselves and might not be committed. If you pay too much in base, they might not be motivated to work hard and go out of their way to close deals. In today's episode, we have our guest, Ryan Wicklum, who discusses why companies require a framework for sales compensation strategies aligned with their growth plans. He also touches on psychological drivers and motivational triggers that drive sales team to deliver results. Finally, he shares several stories of bad compensation strategies that fired back for the company and the good strategies that paid off. Let me introduce Ryan to you. Ryan Wicklum has over 20 years in sales and operations management, ranging from his time in Tier 1 automotive manufacturing to his recent work with tech and consultancy startups. Currently, he is the Director of Business Development at Change Connect, a sales management consultancy based in Markham, Ontario, just outside of Toronto. He has overseen contracts with a combined value of over $1.2 billion. Outside of his life, he lives in Kitchener, Ontario, with his wife, 2 kids, and their mini golden doodle, Griffey. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Ryan, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Sam? I appreciate you having me.
Hey, going great. And I am super excited to have you, Ryan, just because the kind of experience you bring to the table, especially aligning these sales organizations, creating the sales compensation strategies, and driving results. It is going to be so exciting for our listeners in terms of how to do that. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
100%. Yeah. So my background before transitioning into sales consulting was on the operations and supply chain side, mostly in manufacturing. I spent 20 years in high tech and robotics, but also in automotive manufacturing as well. So past that 20 years, I've kind of had a couple of transitional pieces that have led me to doing sales consultancy and has allowed me to take the operational experience that I have and almost use it as a basis to provide better solutions to customers that I currently work with.
Yeah, amazing background, and obviously that is going to be super relevant. It's very hard to find people who understand both sides of the table, operations as well as sales. So you are going to have overall much deeper stories, especially around how to create compensation that is going to be aligned with the entire organization. So we have one of the standard questions, Ryan, we ask before we dig into your background further, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
I think my perspective on business growth is pretty simple. I think that if
Yeah.
you need to look at the motivations of the people involved.
Yeah.
You need to look at, what's the motivation profile, because that is, one of the biggest parts of the bedrock that you
Yeah.
build your business on. So if
Yeah.
you try to force things and you try to take, what exists, the alignment between motivation and results, if you
Yeah.
try to kind of force that round peg in that square hole,
Yeah.
then you're not going to be able to motivate the people well enough. And more importantly, you're not going to be able to find those internal champions
Yep.
within your organization that will really kind of get behind you and proverbially go through a wall for you, because you're not really motivating them in the style or the fashion that they require. So if you can kind of make your business growth more organic and more just let it happen naturally, and then kind of feed the company with people and with funding and with processes when it's necessary,
Yeah.
then that's the best route to go.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that everybody is have different needs overall from their motivation perspective. The more you understand, the more you create the incentives around those motivations, the more successful your strategies, especially the sales comms strategies, are going to be. So
Absolutely.
obviously we are going to be discussing the framework around that, how to think through that framework and how to create those strategies, Ryan. So
All
okay,
right.
so let's say if I am the executive and I am obviously struggling with my sales results. That is always going to be a pain point for a lot of different businesses, the majority of the businesses. So let's say I have done a few things. I don't necessarily have a professional background in setting the sales comp. So do you want to share your thoughts on how to go about creating a framework for the sales compensation? Now, you can describe this in the form of a story that you may already have with your experience working with a existing customer, or you can take a hypothetical example that, okay, these are the things that you should be looking at in finding the criteria in developing the framework. But I want you to share your thoughts in how to start on the journey of creating this framework.
Absolutely. And first off, it's a great question. I think that oftentimes executives, the reason that they get frustrated is because it's
Yeah.
not really, sometimes it's not their nature, or it's not their
Yeah.
in their experience to look at sales comp, because
Yeah.
compensation plans are just foreign to a lot of people. To put a bit of flavor into the question, I think what you're
Yeah.
asking is what can be formally added to existing compensation to make the relationship more appealing to both sides. And I think the first step is understanding like the basic principal agent theory.
Yeah.
And the theory is kind of drawn from the field of economics, in that you describe a problem that results from conflicting interests between a
Yeah.
principal, which is in this case is the company, and an
Yeah.
agent hired by that principal, in this case the employee.
Yeah.
And yeah, as for example, if a company wants an employee's maximum output, or the
Yeah.
best that they can do, but a salaried employee might maybe tempted to kind of slack off
Yeah.
or get away with things if a company can observe how hard or not hard
Yeah.
that employee is working. The need for commission-based compensation is a result of this principal agent theory.
Yeah.
And there are kind of five main considerations that I think the executives need to look at when they look at creating the sales compensation plan. That number one is obviously setting the pay level, which is a basic tenet of compensation.
Yeah.
But then you kind of look at balancing salary with incentives, and kind of what are the proportion of earnings from salary and incentives that determine the riskiness of the plan,
Yeah.
because obviously benchmarking gets involved, and you kind of, if you don't do well enough in the compensation, then you run the risk that your employee might just leave the company, or they won't perform, etc.
Yeah.
You also need to look at designing the plan, consider the metrics, the plan type, the payout curve, like are there caps on earnings, for example.
Yeah.
And then the last main tenet would be the payout periods.
Okay.
Do you look at weekly or annual compensation? Research kind of shows that shorter pay periods will keep lower performers motivated and engaged, whereas longer payout periods motivate high performers because they love that thought of that big check with a bunch of zeros at the end.
Yeah.
And then the fifth kind of pillar to the compensation plan would be the non-monetary incentives, whether it be recognition programs, contests, charitable donations, etc. So I think we look at the 5 pillars of creating a sales comp plan, like setting the pay level, balancing the salary and the incentives, designing the plan, the payout periods, and then the kind of additional or periphery elements. I think those are the kind of 5 things that executive might want to look at.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And by the way, thanks for the refresher. I think it's been a long time since I heard the principal and agent theory. I think we all need to keep that in mind when we are thinking about structuring anything, I guess, for the company, right? That is definitely going to be a driver. And I definitely agree with you there. There is something to the sales comp, and sales comp is definitely a driver that actually bring the results. And if you don't have that variable compensation, regardless of the function that you may have in the company,
Right.
it's very, very, very hard to get that performance from your employees. So now let's talk about those 5 different tenants that you just mentioned. And I think you had a couple of different thoughts there, and I want to make sure that we are able to understand and take in. So here you mentioned a couple of points, especially when you talk about the longer payout is going to be beneficial, and that is typically seen as favorable. If I have a lot of zeros on my paycheck, that is typically seen as favorable by employees. So can
Yeah.
you talk about the psychological driver in terms of understanding, okay, why that is so? Why do people like to see a lot of zeros at the end? And maybe talk about if you have any stories there that you might be able to share with respect to this compensation plan, where let's say you had a plan where you had fewer zeros than more zeros, and the more zeros actually worked better than the fewer zeros.
Yeah. So, for example, like me, my background in automotive, one of the things that is a main driver for automotive sales professionals
Yeah,
is the fact that when you have these longer payout periods, for example, an annual bonus,
yeah,
they look forward to it all year, and they use the regular paychecks and that kind of thing. They use that as living expenses, and they still do well,
yeah,
and they can still work on increasing their base salary through performance, etc.
yeah.
But what really drives them is the thought of that annual bonus check.
Okay.
If your fiscal year ends in December, which was the case in a lot of the companies that I worked with,
Yeah,
then come January, you knew that the sales professionals that were kind of motivated by status or
yeah,
motivated by performance or glory, and they kind of drew esteem from that. If
yeah,
the motivation came from that direction, then they love the idea of you getting that physical check that had a bunch of zeros, or they look in their bank account and they see that all of a sudden it jumped, five, a good 5 digits, right? A good like 20, 30, $40,000
yeah,
for a bonus, and sometimes a lot bigger than that, depending on the automotive tier that you're working with.
yeah,
But I think that when you look at the actual, and you can see it during the year. So in what I saw in automotive was that there would be in the times that it wasn't as busy,
yeah,
the employee, like the sales professionals that were driven by those longer payout periods and those big bonus checks, would
yeah,
actually start to really ratchet up their effort, because they knew that when times are good, that's you're going to make your money in those times. When times
yeah,
are bad, that's when you really need to kind of put the rubber to the road, so to speak, and really kind of zero in on what accounts might need some more attention, what accounts might be able to push across the line to
yeah,
really kind of prop up that big check at the end, because you can't just rely on the good times. It's like
yeah,
John F. Kennedy said that the best time to fix your roof is when the sun is shining. Well, that because of the longer sales cycles in automotive,
yeah,
the best time to kind of work on the accounts that are going to kind of take months to push forth
yeah,
is during times of boom,
yeah,
times of good profit, right? In times of high sales, because you're
yeah,
laying the groundwork, for the months of the long sales cycles that
yeah.
automotive or most manufacturing facilities definitely have.
Okay, so I am going to share some stories from my own personal experience and the way I like to see things. And I don't know if this is going to be similar to what you are trying to describe here.
Sure.
So let's say if I am the salesperson, and let's say if I am trying to close this longer deal, right? I have been working very hard on these deals. And you know what? I am probably going to close in 6 to 9 months. Obviously, I need to work very hard in a lot of opportunities, and one of which may close. Okay. And once that closes, then my expectation as a salesperson is going to be I make something, because as you know, salespeople are driven by compensation. There is no, I mean, if the compensation is not going to be there, then
Right.
why are they making those cold calls? Why are they even doing what they are doing, right? So obviously it makes sense that they need to be driven by compensation. And those are the kind of people we want to find in our sales organization that are really motivated by the compensation. So
Yeah.
now let's say if I'm actually doing this, right? Obviously, as you know, in sales organizations, there are going to be good and bad experiences. Okay. So let's
Yep.
say if you are talking about getting this bonus annually as opposed to getting in that month. Okay. So let's say if
Yep.
I close my deal, I am motivated by instant gratification. As soon as I get my deal, what I want is I want to qualify right away. If I qualify, then I want to move to the demo right away. If I do the demo, then maybe I want to send some sort of proposal right away. If I do the proposal, then I want to close right away. If I close, then I want to get paid right away. Okay, that's how my experience is, from the sales organization perspective. So is this aligned with what you are describing, or are you saying that research suggests that, you know what, if you have annual sales comp where you are accumulating this bonus, that is going to perform better than what I am describing from my personal experience?
Well, it's funny, Sam. So there's actually two levels to the answer, and the one
Okay.
level is the qualitative side. On,
Okay.
on the qualitative side, you need to look at like that, like I said before, the motivations. And
Yeah.
like I agree with you that most sales professionals are definitely motivated by financial gain.
Yeah.
But there's also like you need to look at the idea of they're motivated by status, right? They want to be the ones who are kind of looked at as they are driving the incoming business that supports the company. And in reality, we all know that everyone in a company does sales to some degree, or at least has an effect on sales, whether that be through good or bad customer experience, whether that be through direct sales or their marketing efforts, etc. So look at the motivations and look at the with each of your people, you need to kind of have that motivation profile. At the same time, you need to balance that with the industry you're working in, and understand that the compensation plan needs to be aligned and needs to be benchmarked with the industry you're working in. For example, I can think of Boeing.
Yeah.
Boeing is a great example. The sales cycles in aircraft manufacturing are so unbelievably long. It could take years
Yeah.
talking to an airline to before that airline puts an order in for new 787s or 747s, for
Yeah.
example. A firm like that would probably struggle to retain their people if the pay depended on mostly on commissions, right?
Yeah.
So if you and then at the same time you need to look at how is the commission being put forth, because if you are kind of putting your commissions out based on getting the sales order as opposed to when it goes out the door, then
Yeah.
the timing of the commission or the compensation is very important. I can think of one example in particular where there's a contract manufacturer that I used to buy from when I was on the supply chain side,
Yeah.
and they had a very strong base compensation that was established for the sales team. It had been going on for years,
Yeah.
and the commissions involved weren't really great, but the salespeople were generally happy because the sales cycles tended to be a little bit they could be long because you're talking to a company that might take months to make a decision.
Yeah.
And then what happened when there's a new VP of sales that came on board? This person quickly established a target-based compensation plan that lowered the base salary but raised the commissions dramatically, and the commissions were paid upon revenue shipped,
Yeah.
which is a very important consideration. So the result of this change was that they lost most of their sales team,
Yeah.
and the company ended up 2 years later reverting back to the original comp plan. And the reason it didn't work is simple. Commissions based upon revenue shipped take the responsibility out of the hands of the salesperson, and they spread that responsibility evenly across the company. So, for example, if there are supply issues, as an example, the shipped revenue targets aren't hit, that's
Yeah.
out of the control of the salesperson. They really
Exactly.
have no bearing on it, but it's that salesperson that takes the financial hit when those targets aren't achieved.
Yeah.
So what you've done is you've created a misalignment of motivation,
Yeah.
and that leads to lack of performance, resources leaving the company, but also creates a lot of stress on the people within the organization that aren't being compensated because someone in logistics, for example, if they're not being compensated for performance
Yeah.
or creating a smooth customer experience, etc., then they're going to get some pressure from sales saying, listen, you just cost me X amount of dollars because you didn't deliver that on time last week,
Yeah. Yeah.
which creates strife between within the organization. So I think sometimes when someone comes in and they want to change the compensation structure,
Yeah.
it's very important to look at timing. It's very, very important to look at just the overall, the company or the organization itself, who's being motivated by money, who's being motivated by, just the status. And then at the same time, what is affecting that compensation? Is it just sales performance or is it overall team performance? And
Yeah.
if it's overall team performance, maybe there could be consideration to keeping the sales compensation individual, but
Yeah.
giving your team kind of team goals that they might get, company bonuses company wide based upon performance.
Yeah, I completely agree with your assessment there that, in my experience, also salespeople like to have the control and the KPIs they are going to be measured on and the compensation they are going to be rewarded on. It needs to be in their control. And if it is not going to be in their control, as you correctly pointed out in your story, that most salespeople would leave because they are there for a reason. They really want to control the
Right.
whole sales cycle and they want to make sure that they are winning because they are highly ultra competitive people, right? They want to feel that they are winning. So yeah, I completely agree there. The other comment I am going to have here overall in terms of designing the comp across the board. So let's say if you are designing the compensation, let's say the salespeople are being comped on the order close or whatever they are closing, that is in their control. But then you have to have the team backing up. So as you correctly pointed out, that you need to design the company bonus plan where that team is going to be there to support them. They are not going to say that, this is not my deal. You are making money. I don't care for it. I don't have to close it today. And you know that sales, it's all about the time. So the more motivated the entire team is, but then, you don't have to mix those compensation plan. If you mix, then salespeople are not going to be happy. So great story there. So now let's say if we think of the structuring the comp, what other things that executives should be looking at overall from the sales planning, sales compensation, or the sales territory planning perspective? I think the sales territory is something we did not touch on. I don't know if there are going to be any consideration from that perspective. Do we need to design the territory first and then figure out the compensation, or first compensation, then territory? What would be your perspective on that?
I think it's as territory is definitely it's consideration. Like you're going to
Yeah,
pay a sales rep different in Los Angeles than you would in Wyoming, for
yeah,
example, just because of the cost of living, because of the cost of just generally being there. And as a rule, I think it's more important to look at the industry itself as
yeah,
the primary benchmark. I think for example, the pay scale of a SaaS rep, like
yeah,
a software as a service rep, is very different than the compensation for a construction rep, right? And I think
yeah,
that why should they be the same? Because aside from the word sales rep, the
yeah,
way to sell and the sales process involved is completely different.
exactly.
So I think that there are some basics that people need to know for as an overall baseline when it comes to creating that compensation plan and kind of like the structure of it. I think number one, there needs to be an understanding of the basic requirements
Yeah,
of a good sales plan. Keep it simple. Definitely show cause and effect that if you have better output, you have better compensation. It has to be fair. It has to be easy to measure, easy to administer,
yeah,
etc. I think there also needs to people need to understand that you need to establish the role levels. For example,
yeah,
entry level, baseline, experienced. You're not going to pay your new hire fresh at a university the same compensation level that you're going to pay a 20-year veteran.
yeah,
That's just not reasonable, not feasible. So I think that for the sake of brevity, definitely look at entry level, baseline, and experienced as the three kind of levels of roles. And
yeah,
then at the same time, almost like akin to the manufacturing metric of total cost of ownership, You need
Yeah.
to look at the total on target earnings,
Yeah.
right? And determine what is the overall after everything all in compensation level, right? And I think
Yeah.
that what can be kind of missed sometimes is that if you make it too difficult, you there's so many considerations, and there's tiered if you look like tiered percentages, there's sometimes there's different compensation for new business versus repeat business.
Yeah.
If you make it too difficult to understand, at the end of the year, you might realize like, wow, we paid that person
Yeah.
40% more than we should have,
Yeah.
because we made it too difficult on ourselves to administer and to kind of measure and or the metrics involved. So I think that definitely look at the idea of make it very simple. And then like the final thing that I'd recommend is when you set targets, kind of look at, do you want like a top down target setting or a bottom up target setting,
Okay.
right? Are you looking at the overall like the annual like recognized revenue, the ARR, divided by the
Yeah.
number of salespeople, or are you looking at output per employee multiplied by the quota,
Yeah.
right? So all these things, there are so many levels, and that's one of the reasons that we have the offering that we do at Change Connect, is that it's very difficult to for executives sometimes, because they tend to have they started a company, they had a great idea, a great product,
Yeah.
they're very technical in nature, and as they grow the company, if they don't bring the right people on board from a kind of a sales management standpoint, or if the sales manager leaves the company,
Yeah.
then you have this company with a great idea, good people, just no idea how to compensate their salespeople. So we exist because we've mastered all these considerations, and we have formulas that we've established that just allow for an easier understanding for an executive that might not have that sales background that other executives might.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think we are going to dig into all of this a little bit more to understand how to basically create that ideal structure. And we are going to be touching on a lot of different stories. But before we do that, I want to touch on one of the comments that you made in the previous story. And you said that, you know what, they had lowered the base salary. And
Yep.
obviously, there is going to be always the right mix of base salary and the variable comp. If you do the base salary too low, it's just hard to retain people just because they have bills to pay. And if they are not going to be certain whether they are going to be paid, then it's going to be challenging. And if
Yep.
you look at the manufacturing ecosystem, there is a lot of culture of these independent reps which are not being paid. If they are not being paid, there's going to be this notion that they are probably not going to be loyal to you. They are probably serving pretty much anybody and everybody that they need to be able to survive, because at the end of the day, I mean, they need to pay their bills as well. They need to feed their families, right?
Yep.
So let's look at the base salary. And I don't know if you have any sort of best practices there, but there is definitely an sort of ideal mix there when we analyze the base salary versus the compensation. If you are going to have too high base salary, your people are not going to perform, right? If you are
That's right.
going to do it too low, then people are going to leave. So, what is that ideal mix in your experience that you recommend, especially in the manufacturing sector where they might not be comfortable paying as high base salary if people are not bringing the results, and especially if the deal or the sales cycle may be longer? So, the salesperson who is actually putting effort today, maybe they are going to pay off tomorrow. But you need to have the compensation aligned so that, they are recognized for that effort, and you have created a structure so that they can serve your company, let's say for 1 year, 2 year, whatever that cycle may be, to be
Yep.
able to get the right ROI from that. So, in your experience, what is the right mix from the base salary versus variable comp?
So that's a great question. There's two things that need to be addressed before I'll go into the answer to that question. Number
Okay.
one is that each compensation design project is unique,
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So because of different variables,
Yeah,
it's like I said before, like using the example of Los Angeles and Wyoming.
yeah,
If you kind of try to make it equal, where you pay you have the same sales compensation for a Wyoming manufacturing plant versus a
yeah,
Los Angeles software company,
yeah,
it's just not going to fly. And you're going to have turnover, and your company almost becomes transient
yep,
with the salespeople. So you definitely need to understand that everything's unique, every outcome is unique because the situations and the people are unique.
yep,
The second thing that needs to be addressed is, because of the way the world has gone regarding virtual sales.
yeah,
What's happened is that the sales compensation strategies that existed even 3 years ago don't exist now.
Yeah.
And if they are consistent, something's wrong because
Yeah.
that company hasn't adapted to the new world. And I bring that up because of the virtual, or remote worker.
Yeah.
Now it used to be that a salesperson can only work in a certain geography and you can only work in a certain industry. But
Yeah.
now that the world has opened up, theoretically, you can get to a point where a salesperson in New York is open to every possibility in the U.S.,
Yeah.
Canada, South America, global, like because they can work with anybody at any time
Yeah.
because everything's virtual. And the reason I bring this up is, for example, in Toronto right now, we have, I believe there's just over 28,000 open sales recs
Yeah.
because of it's because U.S. companies, and one of the reasons is U.S. companies are looking at things and they think, okay, interesting, we have $100,000 American in the
Yeah.
budget to hire a salesperson. We could hire a salesperson in the U.S. for that money, or we could look and get somebody for 140,000 in Canada
Yep.
because the exchange rate is roughly 30-40% difference.
Yep.
So that kind of opens the door as an example for that American company, instead of hiring somebody from the U.S. to be the Canadian rep, they just
Yep.
hire a Canadian to be a Canadian rep. And theoretically, the skill level might be a little bit different between the pay levels.
Yep.
But to go back to your question about just the overall motivations involved and the overall, I think it's very important that to look at the direct compensation strategies and
Yeah.
what is new, newish to manufacturing might be. Don't forget that's not new to the business world,
Yeah.
right? In the world of like software sales, for example, you can be a B2B, B2C rep. Now you're kind of direct to consumer, and that's fine. But it goes back to all about the base salary and commission goes down
Yeah.
to what is the delta? What is the difference between what exists with a base salary and what
Yeah.
is the acceptable motivation level for overall, like the total earnings of a sales professional. And
Yeah.
if that delta or that difference is what you're willing to pay in a commission, then your salesperson will be satisfied.
Yeah.
If you create a situation in which the commission isn't high enough,
Yeah.
or doesn't fill that gap, doesn't bridge that gap between base and overall compensation desired by a salesperson,
Yeah.
that person won't be motivated, and they will either stay and not perform, or they'll leave and go perform somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's when it comes to the kind of relationship between the base salary and commission, it really is all about what is the base requirement that you're willing to pay, and what is the overall desire requirement of the salesperson, and are you willing to pay that delta?
Yeah, I agree. And I like your examples about these different geographies because they are going to have different cost of living. So typically, when I think of the base salary, let's say if I am making 50,000 in base salary in California, I'm probably starving. But if I'm making 50,000 in, let's say, Blue Ash, Ohio, I may be okay because I can probably rent an apartment for, I don't know, maybe $1,000 or whatever. I don't know, man.
Right.
But California, I'm probably not going to find anything under, $5,000.
No, absolutely not.
So base salary has to consider that factor that, what is the cost of living in that area? And is the salesperson worried about paying the basic needs? If they are going to be worried about paying the basic needs, there is no way they are going to perform because they are going to be worried about, okay, can I get another job for 4 hours? Can I do something else so that I can feed my family? That's what they are going to do, right? So I think the
Yep.
basic needs is how I would think in designing the base salary, and you did touch on that. And then after that, okay, where do you want to be? At least, you need to be comparable with the other employees that you might have in the company, maybe higher than them or comparable to their peers that might be making that much money. And I think you did touch on that as well. So now let's go back to some of these stories, Ryan. And I know I'm pretty sure you have seen a lot of really bad compensation structures and really good compensation structures, right? So do you have any stories where some of the variables you saw and you were like, okay, this is not going to work? I know that's okay. the sales is not going to happen here because of the compensation. So do you have any stories that you might be able to share? Good comp and bad comp.
Yeah, I think that, beyond the one earlier that I mentioned about the new VP of sales coming in, there was one situation in which there was a misalignment. I mentioned about base salary and
Yeah,
the delta between base salary and overall desired salary.
yeah,
Um, that actually, when you have a business that is kind of linear,
yeah,
it works almost perfectly
yeah,
because a salesperson can very much plan that, okay, they're getting a consistent offering. The bonuses might not be as dynamic,
yeah,
but they definitely support the needs of the family, needs of hit the motivation levels of that salesperson.
yeah,
When you have a business that is very very cyclical,
yeah,
it becomes a little bit different.
yeah,
And in one case in particular I can think of in automotive where automotive definitely has their peaks and valleys throughout the year. Typically in the
yeah,
summer,
yeah,
there's a bit of a slowdown because shutdowns involved at the various automakers. And
yeah,
I can think of one situation where there was an automaker that I was providing parts to, and that automaker didn't account for the cycles, the
yeah,
sales cycles, and what made it worse was that they didn't account for the length of the sales cycle or the timing of the sales cycle.
yeah,
So what they did is that they thought, okay, in the time of slow time, like in the summer, that's when we're going to kind of decentivize.
yeah,
And then when times are going good, we're going to incentivize them. And
yeah,
when they're really busy. And what that created was this complete misalignment, almost like a complete and thorough misalignment
yeah,
of the timings, because they didn't take into account just how long the sales cycles were.
yeah, yeah,
So what happened was the salespeople were saying, listen, like we're starving in
yeah,
in the summer
yeah,
because you're recognizing revenue when it's going out the door. There's no
yeah,
one to ship it,
yeah,
and there's nobody to buy it because there's nobody at the customer at the supplier or customer site. So everyone's on shutdown
yeah,
for 2 weeks in July or a week in July, whatever it is. So in the summer we're starving. In
yeah,
in the winter we're making money hand over fist.
yeah,
But then you're putting a lot of pressure on the salesperson to kind of put money away and kind of store it away, and it just wasn't a good alignment at all. So what happened was there was an immense amount of turnover. In an
yeah,
automotive, if you can't get the word out, and because the cycles are so long, if you don't have the people in place to lay the groundwork
yeah,
for for the longer sales cycle that might take months or years to kind of go through, then you'll fulfill all the orders that are placed. You'll have nothing at the top of the funnel,
yeah,
right? And that's the problem. So what happened with this company is that they end up having drops and dribbles of
yeah,
business in the top of the funnel around August, September, time frame. And what
yeah,
came around to the when the orders were fulfilled they went through that slow time in July. The sales team took off for 2 weeks.
yeah,
There's nobody to fill the funnel. So
yeah,
by the time it can December, January, February, March in that time frame, there was no business because they didn't time their compensation properly. So what happened was they suffered and they had to end up selling off the company because they didn't learn from it. It happened year
yeah,
after year, and
yeah,
salespeople would leave, and then salespeople would come in, and typically what happened is that when salespeople leave, the two strategies of filling those shoes are
yeah,
bringing somebody more junior in,
yeah,
or you pay an exorbitant amount to pull somebody from an existing competitor or someone else in the industry. So what happened was they didn't learn from their mistakes. They're very stubborn about it, and the company ended up being sold off for a fraction of what they could have sold off for because they didn't align their compensation plan properly to allow for the peaks and valleys and the time like the sales cycle length to be a factor.
yeah. Amazing story there, and definitely I completely agree with you that the sales compensation is going to be far more detailed analysis in each specific situation, and if you don't think through that. If you don't really listen to your salespeople, they are probably not going to stay with you. So that's it for today, Ryan. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or advice?
Yeah, just the understanding of motivation playing the part is huge. And there are always going to be, quantitative factors and financial indicators that you can take care of. And those will kind of take care of themselves if you align the motivations properly. Compensation is a motivator that aligns performance with company goals, but you can't look at the compensation piece in isolation. It's part of the overall tapestry of performance, and compensation needs to fit into the more wide-reaching plan for overall alignment with those goals. And I will say that definitely at Change Connect we do this on a regular basis where we help companies kind of design their compensation plans and make it more effective for their particular industries. And we look at, like I said before, we have all the factors and the formulas that we've established, and we do this for a living. So if there is anybody that is looking to have their comp plan looked at, definitely changeconnect.ca is our website, and or please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. My name is Ryan Wicklum, and I would send me a DM, and I'd be happy to respond.
Okay, amazing, Ryan. And my personal takeaway from the conversation is going to be the sales compensation strategies require you to have deeper understanding of your own products, your own market, as well as your competitors. So the
Absolutely.
more data you have, the more information you have, along with what is going to drive your salespeople. Once you have all of that understanding, then you can figure out that ideal comp that is really going to work for your situation and that is going to work for your company. On that note, Ryan, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Sam, I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to any questions. I look forward to coming on again sometime.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Ryan, head over to changeconnect.ca. It's CHANGECONNECT.ca, or connect with him on LinkedIn. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Enrico Parodi, who discusses the sales organization's key components. Also the interview with Laurie McDonald, who discusses sales compensation best practices for organizations aiming to transition to e-commerce from the traditional sales model. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.